I called down to the Air Force Research and Development Center and put on my strongest doctor voice. And I said, "This is Dr. Urbanek from Vanderbilt. You guys have any lasers down there?"
From Vanderbilt.
Yeah, you got to add the Vanderbilt, right?
Yeah.
What's up, dental peeps? It's your girl Irene here with Tooth or Dare podcast. Hold on to your suction. It's about to get slippery.
Welcome back to another episode of the Tooth or Dare podcast, peeps, with your peep Irene. I'm joined by a wonderful human who I have yet to meet in real life. And we're here to talk about all things TMJ. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Tony. Do you go by Anthony, Tony?
I go by Tony.
By
That's
Tony?
what Mom called me. Yep.
That's what your mom called you. And sorry, I should have asked you before how I pronounce your name. Is it Urbanek?
Urbanek.
Urbanek. Perfect.
Urbanek.
Well,
Yep.
I'm very excited to get to learn more about you. You are not just an oral maxillofacial surgeon, but you've got a double degree. You've been practicing in Nashville for the past 46 years, doing some pretty tough cases. Arguably a pioneer in laser-induced surgical interventions, and you've got a lot of philanthropic things that you've done, setting up clinics in Haiti and Jamaica. And to add to that, somehow you've also been a private pilot for the better part of 50 years. So I'm very excited to learn more about you personally and also professionally. Where can we start? Can we start at the beginning? Where were you born?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's right at the beginning. I was born in Gary, Indiana, steel mill town, blue collar through and through. I have a blue collar background. At the time, Gary was thriving in the steel mill business, and I was able to. I had a wonderful childhood, and I was able to kind of balance the abilities that I had and the opportunities I had in Steel Town, because U.S. Steel was actually built Gary, Indiana, and
what does that mean? I'm in Canada, and I'm in the downtown metropolis of Toronto. What does that mean? What did a childhood look like in Gary, Indiana?
Well, it was blue collar. My mom and dad each had a job. My father ran a bottling company for another man, and my mom was a oral maxillofacial assistant, and but definitely had a very small home and a very good high school. And I was able to then go to college in Cleveland, Ohio, but I was able to pay for it. That's the point, by working in the steel mills. So I paid for a private education working in the steel mills over the summertime, which was amazing. Can't do it now, but back then it was very available. And then I went to college in Cleveland, Ohio, a little Jesuit school in Cleveland called John Carroll University. And my claim to fame there was I almost flunked out my first semester.
No way.
Oh yeah, way. Yeah, way. My first semester, I had the grade point average of 1.7 out of 4. I hated college. I didn't.
Why do you think that was?
Oh, I know why it was. No, they were trying to teach me stuff I would never use. But I knew enough history and English and literature coming out of a good high school, and I didn't need any more of that. But they were trying to teach me things that I know I'd never use. Not that it wasn't valuable; it just wasn't valuable to me.
Yeah.
And so, but I sucked it up. I learned after the first semester that I needed to do something. My older brother was a successful dentist. He was 7 years elder. He was already in practice at the time, and everybody thought my brother was a very successful guy. So basically, I aimed on going to dental school, and fortunately, improved my GPA enough to get acceptance into a dental school. I got accepted into my home state, Indiana, where I did extremely well because once I got into dental school, they started teaching me things I could use. I loved the basic sciences. I was like enthralled. It was like they're teaching me how the body works, the anatomy, physiology, biochemistry of the whole thing. And I did extremely well and finished dental school in 3 years rather than 4 at the top of my class. But the dean said in his own way, told me, I thought he was going to shake my hand and say thank you. But he said dental school is 4 years. So I had to find something else to do my senior year, and I applied to the medical school as a student in cell biology and anatomy. And within a year, I finished the program, a 2-year program in cell biology and anatomy. And then from there, I went on to Vanderbilt, here in Nashville, where actually they designed a unique program for me. It was oral and maxillofacial surgery, MD, PhD. I was gearing to be a professor. At the time, Vanderbilt Oral and Maxillofacial was minting a lot of chairmen in the departments, and I won't throw out names, but several of my colleagues in my era went on to be chairman of the department and editors of the Journal of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery. But right at the end, I had finished my oral maxillofacial training and residency, and I finished the medical degree, and I had done everything that I needed to on the PhD, except my professor and professor at the time, and he was also in charge of my PhD program, told me that my thesis was he didn't want me to publish it because it was not. Let me see, the word he used was traditional.
What was your thesis?
Well, I had proven that you could do intrauterine fetal surgery, create animal models with facial defects. See, I was a maxillofacial reconstructive surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
And the work was using a laser to do intrauterine fetal surgery and the model I used was rabbits. And so I proved that you could do that. You could use a laser, create facial defects for further study. I mean, not just to create facial defects, to create those defects so that then you could do additional work on facial defects on animal models. And I proved the point, but I was told that was not traditional. And I told my advisor, my PhD advisor, chairman of the Department of Anatomy, that I knew what I was going to say, and I knew what that meant. I told him that was an oxymoron to put traditional and research in the same sentence.
Yeah.
I emphasized moron. And,
in italics.
That was the end. That was the end of my. I knew it.
So did you publish? What did you do?
Well, I went on. I decided that being a professor was not for me. I decided I wanted to actually come out in private practice, which was a very good decision for me. I really like teaching. I still teach, and I loved the research. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about the research I've done on TMD.
Mm-hmm.
And but I didn't like the bureaucracy. It was just obvious that if the fellow who had total control over my PhD said that my research was too traditional for him, that I was in the wrong place.
Yeah. Wait, but you still didn't tell us what it is. Those weren't the days where you could just leak it to the internet and somehow it's published. So what did you choose to do? Did anyone get to read it other than this moron?
Nope. No. I didn't publish it. I didn't go on. I came out into private practice and built a practice doing primarily the major facial reconstructive things that the maxillofacial surgeon does, orthognathic surgery, tremendous amount of TMJ surgery at the time, microneural surgery, cleft lip and cleft palate, cancer reconstruction, of course, a lot of trauma, and that kind of stuff. And I spent most of my early career in the operating room, doing that kind of stuff.
Do you have a favorite of what you used to do or still do? I guess those are maybe two separate things, but back then.
I don't do any surgery anymore at all. I quit doing any kind of surgery about 4 years ago. But my favorite was orthognathic surgery. I mean, because it was really very technical and very, you get to see your results and the planning. It was all about the planning. So you had to plan it well and then execution in the operating room. And then you got the admiration phase. As a surgeon, dealing with my colleagues in general surgery and cardiac surgery, we all say there's three phases to surgery. There's the planning, there's the execution, and there's the admiration phase. So you get to see what you created. And I like that part a lot. That is the reason there, the cleft palate work with the kids. I love that. That was a good thing. But the orthognathic stuff, you could admire, the changes you made for this patient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In function and form.
Yep.
Let's talk about your laser induced surgeries and your research. So which came first, and how did you take your research and apply it into clinical surgical practice?
Well, I didn't really, the laser research, I was the fellowship, that was a 2-year fellowship in conjunction with my MD, PhD, and my OMS training. It was a unique program that they kind of put together for me. So part of that was I applied for and got this grant from the NIH, National Institute of Health, the National Institute in the United States called the National Institute of Dental Craniofacial Research, NIDCR. And so I applied for the grant, and they thought that the topic was good enough. So I proved the point that you could actually create these animal models doing intrauterine fetal surgery. But frankly, well, let's go back a bit. I never thought of that. I had to find a laser there in Tennessee in 1978. I go back years. Look at the white hair here, okay? I go back many years. There was no laser in
What
Tennessee.
kind of laser? Like a CO2 argon? What kind of laser are we talking about?
Yeah, CO2 laser. At the time, there really were only CO2 lasers. And so I was faced, I had won this grant from the NIH to do the study. I had never dreamed that their lasers in Tennessee were so hard to find. So I called, there weren't any lasers in the physics department at Vanderbilt. There weren't any lasers in Memphis at the medical school. I called all over the state and there weren't any lasers. And I was like, I'm in trouble. I have this grant to perform this study. And then it dawned on me that the Air Force had a research and development center. In fact, the research and development center for the Air Force is located in Tullahoma, Tennessee, just about 50 miles south of Nashville. And I called down to the Air Force Research and Development Center and put on my strongest doctor voice. And I said, this is Dr. Urbanek from Vanderbilt. You guys have any lasers down there?
From Vanderbilt.
Yeah, you got to add the Vanderbilt, right?
Yeah.
And I was talking to some, I don't know whether he was a lieutenant or whether he was, whatever he was, he said, let me just check this out. So make a long story short, I don't want to waste time. Within a week, I had a laser delivered to me at Vanderbilt. It was the size of a washing machine.
Yeah.
Had 2 buttons on it. It said charge and fire. and then I had to figure out how to use it and how
Oh my gosh. There were no YouTube videos back then to show you how to use. There's probably a manual that was like this thick.
Well, I knew how to. It didn't come with instructions. It had 2 buttons on it, and you push the button that said charge, and then it would make this strange sound, woo, and then finally, when that stopped, you push the button that said fire, and it just bang. You could hear the laser come on. It's an intermittent laser. So anyway, that's what I needed. I didn't need a continuous laser. I needed a laser that put out most charge, and I figured out how to cone down the laser beam and focus it correctly so that when I opened the belly of a rabbit, we could get the laser pointed exactly in the right place that I wanted it to point. So anyway, getting back to that's
fascinating.
Talking about that.
No, I think it's cool. Our listeners like to hear about, the journey of. We could talk about all of the things that you are doing now and how you got to where you're going, but it's the journey that's the most exciting part. It's the incremental changes in someone's life that gets them to the stage where they are now. I think the beginning parts are the most fascinating parts. And they teach you lots of life lessons too.
Absolutely. I agree with you. The journey is what it's all about. And I've really had a journey.
Yeah.
But
sounds like it.
The application of this study, it didn't apply to my clinical. Again, I had the laser the size of a washing machine. I couldn't bring that into the operating room.
I don't even know how they shipped that thing to you. That's crazy.
Well, it was fortunate. I was really fortunate. I was able to put it all together. So I started my private practice immediately.
Did you
I don't want
mentor
to
with anyone before you decided to open up your own practice? I mean, I guess you've had a lot of experience surgically at that point, doing residencies and lots of surgical things in school. But how did you know the business part of it?
I didn't, but, but
Sounds like
I,
a journey too.
as a journey too, as a journey also. But if you really want to hear the whole story, I
Yeah.
know, again, I don't. So, I mean, the whole story. May of 1981, I had finished all this stuff, all this training. In May of 1981, I decided I was going to open up my own practice. I borrowed $10,000 because
That's it.
I had no money. I borrowed $10,000. I got a lease on a little office next to one of the major hospitals in Nashville. Uh, at the same month I got married, and the same month I started an aviation business.
So is that where the flying comes into, doing private flying? How does that all tie in?
Oh, it ties in all the way back. I was the only intern at Vanderbilt who had his own airplane.
How did you
And
have your own airplane?
that
I
is a
feel like you're
story.
skipping over a lot of stuff here, Dr. Tony. Come on.
Well, if you want, we'll spend a whole hour talking about this stuff. We'll never get into TMD, which is fine with
Oh, we
me.
totally will. We totally will. We'll get there. I promise. We will.
All right. Well, who doesn't like to talk about themselves? So,
Right. Tell me about
so
flying.
flying. Well, I wanted to be an airline pilot back in Gary, Indiana. I really wanted to be commercial airline pilot, but at that time, in the mid '60s, if you wanted to fly commercially, you had to go through the military.
Oh.
And again, I tried to get into the Navy, but my eyes were bad, and I was told that I'd fly right behind the pilot as a intercept officer. You got Tom Cruise and Goose. Tom
Yeah.
Cruise flew the airplane and Goose rode behind.
Yeah.
You remember that movie?
Talk to me, Goose.
Uh,
Sure.
Top Gun.
Yeah.
So I told the recruiter, I said, I don't want to ride in the airplane. I want to fly the airplane. But my eyes were not 20/20. So that was out of the question. So but that also knocked me out of I was in high school at the time. So that knocked me out of being a pilot. So I went to college and ended up a dentist, right?
Hmm.
Told you that story.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was I couldn't afford to fly. I got my license last year in college, my basic pilot's license, but I couldn't afford to fly in dental school. I had no money. And I used to go out to the airport and watch other people fly, but I got to Vanderbilt. And the first 2 weeks at Vanderbilt, I had the opportunity to be in the operating room assisting, really just holding retractors and cutting suture for somebody else. But in the operating room, and the anesthetist at the head of the table, we got talking over the case, over the surgery, and he was a pilot, and he invited me out to fly with him one day, and I went, oh, awesome! And he only had Sundays off. I mean, it was the time when residents they just worked you to death, like
Yeah.
6 days, 6.5 days a week, 24, almost 20. You got 8 hours, maybe 6 hours to sleep a day. Anyway, on Sunday afternoon, I was out flying with him. He calls me up about 2 weeks later, and he said, Doc, he said, we have 4 people on this airplane, and one of them wants to sell his portion of the airplane. And I immediately said, I can't afford an airplane. There's no way. I mean, I appreciate you calling, but I can't afford it. And
What did an airplane cost back then? And what kind of plane are we talking about here?
Well, I'll tell you what kind of plane we're talking about in a minute. But it was Cessna 172. That's a really nice airplane. It's 4-place, single engine. And actually, I flew that airplane to Haiti when I started my work in Haiti. So anyway, he said, and finally at the end, after we talked about the airplane and a little bit about flying, I just couldn't help myself. I said, how much does he want for a quarter of the airplane? And he said $1,000. And I said, like I said, I can't afford that. And he said, okay. He says, well, just think about it, maybe in the future. So the next day, I'm walking down the hall, and my co-intern comes the other way, and he looks at me and he says, hey, did you get your check yet? And I went, check? I said, what do you mean? He says, don't you know they're paying you for your internship? I said, no, I never thought of it. And he said, yeah, you take your badge, you go down to the bursar's office and underneath the hospital, you slide your badge underneath the grate there and she'll give you a check. That's exactly what I did. And, 2 minutes, I was down there collecting my check. She went back and grabbed a check and slid it out from underneath the grate. And it was a check for $1,000.
Somehow fate
And,
just happened to land at your doorstep, huh?
and that is the way that I ended up with a quarter of an airplane within 2 weeks of starting my internship and residency at Vanderbilt. So I was collecting $1,000, and I was used to living on really a couple $100 a month, rent and a couple $100. So I was collecting these checks, and then about 3 or 4 months later, I just put them in the bank. And
Hmm.
about this anesthetist calls me up. And by that time, I had been flying the airplane every Sunday afternoon. And he calls me up and he says, Tony, he says, we had a meeting of the other of our members last night. And he says, you're the only guy that's really flying the airplane.
Hmm.
He says, we really talked about it. Would you like to buy the other 3/4 of the airplane? And I said, immediately, I didn't hesitate. I said, how much? And he said, $3,000, which I had in the bank.
No way.
And that is how I ended up with
Pretty
a
good
Cessna
value
17.
for a plane, I guess.
Well,
Something
at
of
that
that
time, this was
size.
it was an older 172, but serviceable, a great airplane. Hardly anything ever broke on it. Fuel was 25 cents a gallon at the time. Okay, you got to understand, this was a different era.
Yeah,
Irene, this is a
absolutely.
different time. Okay,
Oh, I get it.
and
I
so,
get
but
it.
I was able to maintain and fly that airplane for many, many years until I went into the aviation business, at which I started moving up airplanes.
Cool.
But anyway, so yeah, in May of
Let's talk about you said you flew it to Haiti. So tell me about your mission trips. Tell me about that element of your life. What inspired you to create
to
a
do it,
company, or how did you do it? What was the plan?
well, as I was finishing up my training program, actually, I was into the last part of it. Actually, my grant and finishing up the research. I had decided when I finished up, I wanted to go out and into to really help people. And I was hooked up. I was going to church at the time, to a church here in Nashville that was supporting a Haitian missionary. Um, and I had heard them speak on it. And I went after one of the services. I went up and I said, "Would you be interested in having a doctor go down to Haiti?" And obviously the answer was yes. This was a year or so before I finished my training. And so over the next year, we set it up and planned it that I would go down there, and the mission that they were developing was out in the middle of nowhere. We're not talking Port-au-Prince. We're talking out in the northwest part of Haiti, where these folks had never seen a doctor. And again, to make a long story short, they set it up and they actually built a little clinic. Now, when I say clinic, we're talking about cement floor and tin roof. Okay. That was the clinic. And that was a big deal. A cement floor was a big deal. A tin roof was a big deal because most of the people down there lived on dirt floors and thatched roofs. And very primitive by our nature. Um, they had just gotten running water, which was piped in from a spring up in the hills. That was a big deal that was able to do that. But anyway, so over the next year, we had this plan. And then, of course, I was just finishing my training. Remember, I had to borrow $10,000 to start my practice. So I had to figure out how to get all the stuff, all the instruments and stuff I needed to do this first trip. I had the airplane. I could fly down there. I had the knowledge. Um, and so what I did is I went and I started doing presentations at service organizations, Rotary organizations, Kiwanis organizations, telling them what my plan was. And within a short time, I mean, I had 3 or 4 organizations give me a little money. I had a couple $1,000 in donations, at which point I was able to go out and buy a generator, small generator. And I went and I wrote letters to all my dental colleagues in Nashville. At the time, there were only about 70 dentists in the Nashville area. So I hit them all up. Basically, asked them if you had any stuff you wanted to give away, any local anesthesia that was available, any forceps, anything, that they had. And so I started collecting all this stuff from all my dental colleagues, and I filled my living room, literally filled my living room with boxes of old dental stuff. And then I sorted it all out, what I could use, what I couldn't use. Um, Put it in the
Did you reach
airplane.
out to any manufacturers or distributors? Did anyone help support you in that side?
I did. I was just,
Yeah.
someone asked me that recently. I had hit up Eli Lilly, the Eli Lilly representative at Vanderbilt. I knew him pretty well. I hit him up. I said, I'm making this trip. Can Eli Lilly kick in something? I said, how about some penicillin? And he gave me a big box of 4 tubs of penicillin. There were just 4 large tubs of penicillin tablets, which can't go wrong. It's good for about everything, right?
Yeah.
So, and that
Unless you're allergic to penicillin.
unless you're allergic.
Then you're in trouble.
So I took all the seats except my seat, pilot seat, out of this 4-place airplane and filled the rest of it. Really, it was a matter of weight and balance.
Yeah.
And I put everything I could weight-wise into the airplane, and I flew 750 miles over ocean down to Port-au-Prince, and the missionary picked me up at the airport, and it was an interesting trip. I had never been to Haiti, never knew anything about it. It was a different time. I would not recommend a trip to Haiti right now, but back then it was safe.
Yeah.
It was safe. I felt safe. It was safe. We got in this Jeep and we went off on a trip. It was 5 hours, 2 hours on paved roads, 2 hours on rut roads, and the last hour was no roads. And we got up to a little town, little village that is, you can Google it, you can find it, look hard enough, called Beauchamp, 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 Haiti. And there was the little clinic. And I did a medical clinic in the morning, and I took out teeth in the afternoon until the sun went down or I couldn't move my arm. It was the dental clinic, was just an extraction clinic. And I have a lot of funny stories about that, but it was, and that was my first trip down. And then once I made that first trip, then the word got out. And then I had several doctors in Nashville, dentists in Nashville, who wanted to make the trip with me. And so I did several trips along with, other doctors going down there. And that was how we founded a medical dental clinic in Beauchamp, Haiti.
Does it still exist?
The answer is probably not. In fact,
No.
almost for sure not, because of what's going on in Haiti in the past few years.
Yeah.
And it's not a safe place to be. It's just not safe.
Yeah.
I keep track of everybody in the Nashville area that has gone down there, and it's consistent. It's not safe and getting worse as time goes on, which is very, very unfortunate. But my reputation preceded me, and within a few years, not a few, probably about 8, 9 years later, I was asked to go to lunch by a Baptist minister, and he said, "We heard what you had done in Haiti. We wanted to start a medical clinic in Jamaica, but haven't been able to do it for 20 years. Would you help us?" And I always like to help people, but I told him, one of the things I learned in Haiti was if you wanted to do anything at all, you had to go to the very top. If you talk to a bureaucrat anywhere down the line, it was all about what they could get out of it. You basically had to grease their palm with some money if you wanted to get something done. That's a fact. And I knew that, but I also knew that if you could talk to the very top person, you might be able to get something done. So I told this minister, I said, if you can get me an appointment with the head person in healthcare on Jamaica, on the island, I will consider going down there and see what I could do. And about a month later, he calls me up. He says, "When would you like your meeting with the Minister of Health?" I put my foot in it, and I couldn't back out then. I figured I'd never get a call back,
Wow.
So again, long story. By that time I was married, and I had a bigger airplane. I was flying a twin engine airplane by then. And I put the minister in the back and my wife and I in the front. And we flew down to Jamaica, and I met with the Minister of Health. And that's another story. I don't want to belabor it, but I thought I was going to sit across from the desk of the Minister of Health, and they ushered me into a conference room that was the table was about 30 feet long.
Wow.
And I sat there until the doors opened on the other end, and a very stately Jamaican gentleman entered, and about 10 people followed him. And they seated themselves at this long desk, me at one end and the Ministry of Health at the other. And first we had it's British, right? And
Yeah.
and we had tea and little cookies, and we talked the pleasantries about how was the trip and things like that, and a little bit about
Mhm.
airplanes. And finally, I was waiting for him to open it up because I know how to do this game. And finally, he said, "Dr. Urbanek, why are you here?" And
And you're like, good question. I thought I was invited by your people.
I'm gonna tell your listeners something that they can use throughout their life that will make a big difference to them and will apply in many different instances. I'm gonna tell them something that's really valuable. A- And and what I knew is that the Jamaicans and the Haitians, they don't have much, but they're very proud people. And they don't like to be told what you're gonna do for them. They don't- they they don't like that. You can have all kind of different programs, and that is what. So I looked at him and I said, "Sir," I told him who I represented. At the time, I was president of the Flying Physicians Association, which is at the time had about 1,700 MD doctors in the United States who owned and flew airplanes. Rotary International and Aid International is another organization that transports charity stuff throughout the world. I said, "These are the organizations I represent." And I said, "I am not here to tell you what we want to do for you. I am here to ask you what's needed and wanted." That's the
Mm.
key. While I while we spent the first few minutes getting ready to actually talk about this, the people on the other side, they were all healthcare people, and the people on each side of this conference table, were tight. You can see they're just kind of sitting like this. And when I said those magic words, I'm not here to tell you what I'm here to do for you. I'm here to ask you what's needed and wanted. You could see they just all sat back and relaxed like this.
Mm.
And the Minister of Health, I remember his name well. His name was the Honorable Eastman Douglas. Very, very little white hair. He's very, had a lot of presence. And he was stunned. I could tell he was stunned because he looked at me for about 30 seconds, didn't say a word.
Mm.
And then he asked me a couple simple questions, which I do not remember what they were. All I remember is they were so simple. They were just shot out the answer. And then he said, "Dr. Urbanek," he says, "we have 5 buildings on the north coast of Jamaica, right on the water. These are 5 buildings. This is our medical clinic up there. He says, we have one doctor who goes up there one half day a month to service 50,000 people."
Oof.
And then he said, "If you would like," he said, "we will let you use those buildings if you want to put a medical clinic up there," which
Wow.
was just A to B. So that's how we started the Trelawney Outreach Project. I guess the message here, besides the fact that when you're trying to negotiate something with someone, I mean, even within the family or a business or professionally, if you have a patient, you have a difficult patient, that's a good application. And, we all get difficult patients, right?
Yeah.
Ask the patient what's needed and wanted. It breaks the ice. It lets them know that you're there to service them, to help them, uh, to provide what they need and not what you want to give them. But it
Mhm.
applies so much. But from that point, once we were invited to do that, I was so busy. I had so much going on, building my practice and running an aviation company. And I found another one of my colleagues in the Flying Physicians who was also Rotarian, and asked him if he'd like to take on the project because I had no time to do it.
Yeah.
So with myself and him, we built the Trelawney Outreach Project, which ended up with doctors coming from throughout the world. And
Wow.
ended up with dental, medical, OBGYN, a general surgical suite. They had 5 buildings up there were set up for a medical clinic. It was a big deal.
Wow.
It
That's
was,
great. That's a great story. What a great experience and what a great legacy that you created. not only for the Haitians, but also for the Jamaicans. I've done quite a bit of mission work. I go once a year somewhere. In the last 4 years, I've gone to a small island in the Bahamas and
Where have you gone?
Eleuthera.
Eleuthera?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very familiar. I've flown all over the Bahamas. If you must consider, we could talk forever about flying and
Yeah,
everything.
we could.
all
I
over.
think we're gonna cap it and get into TMD stuff. But my very first mission trip was to Honduras, and I
Mhm.
was a year at a dental hygiene school. It was 2008, and I remember it to be one of the most profound experiences. And since then, I kind of vowed to myself that I would do something like this annually if possible. And after that, I went to Africa, and I spent a month doing mission work in Africa. I started in Nairobi, went down to Mombasa, across to Tanzania, and then all the way back up through the Maasai back to Nairobi. And the group that I worked with, I mean, I'm not a religious person by the religion that I traveled with, but I
Sure,
learned a lot about Seventh Day Adventists and
sure.
the just their general being and culture and kindness. I
Right.
think everyone seems to think that mission trips have to be overly religious, and that isn't the case. And just because you're traveling with a bunch of people that are religious, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to. And I want to encourage people that are listening to leave that mindset and that mentality, because you have a service that you can provide, and it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to a particular god. So I found that to be really profound and moving. And I unfortunately haven't been able to go back to Africa. That's quite a long way to go. And I don't have a month anymore. But
That's
you come
tremendous.
you come back a different person, I
Yes,
think.
I totally agree. I came back from my first trip. This is my first trip to Haiti. I came back a different I tell people that.
Yeah.
Came back a different person, and all whatever the work or the resources I had to gain or get, uh, what I got from it, from the trips and what I
Yeah.
did far outweighs what I had to put into it. Far
Yeah.
outweighs.
And I think repetition of mission trips is important. I think back to the first one that I did, and then the second, and then the third, and then the fifth. And I've been practicing for almost 17 years now. And I haven't done 17 mission trips, but I've done close to 10. Um, you go through a cycle, right? You go there feeling like you're looking to fulfill some sort of void and give back, and you come back a better person. And it's this roller coaster ride. You fall back into the habits that you had before, and then you go back in the mission trip, and every time you come back a different person, and every time you come back a better human. But the person that you were, for me, 10 mission trips ago versus the person that I am now, you learn patience and kindness and understanding and communication skills, especially with people that don't speak your language or speak a different form of physical language. Like I remember in Africa, um, there was this Maasai warrior, and the way that they communicate pain, in dentistry here, you got a patient with their finger in their mouth saying it's this tooth over here. But in Kenya, they show you on your face, so they're kind of like touching your face to show you where it is. And I remember feeling this like invasion of personal space by this person that was 5 times bigger than me and taller than me, trying to touch me to show me where their pain was. You learn a lot of these interpersonal skills that I don't think you get to learn, definitely not in school, and even in private practice, depending on, I practice in a very affluent neighborhood. You don't see things
We don't
like that.
realize w-
How
uh,
lucky we are.
how how lucky we are. We think that our culture is everyone should be like our culture. And you go out into the third world, whether it be the Maasai in Africa or the Haitians and their voodoo down in Haiti, uh,
Yeah.
they practice these cultures and they're very happy at it. Also, you have to understand that you don't have to have a lot of stuff to be happy. What's one of the major reasons, because I saw people who had almost nothing who were very happy and satisfied. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should cap our learning about you
Mhm.
here, and
Okay.
do a part two immediately
Okay.
about TMD work. So thank you for joining us for part 1 with Dr. Anthony Urbanek. Stay tuned for part 2, where we talk about TMD.
All right.
Let's say goodbye to the people.
Goodbye. Bye.
Okay.